Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. Very glad to have you. I am the linguistic liaison for those of you who don't know that yet. And today the title of our video is Pink Brains, Blue Words, Debunking Gender Myths in Language Learning. So I don't know about you, but a popular opinion that I always heard growing up from my aunts, my gran, even my mom at times is that girls are better at languages and boys are better at the sciences or maths. Now after this thought has been running around in my head for years, I actually wanted to dive into this and find out, is there any truth to that statement? And what I found out is that that is a complete myth. There is no truth to that whatsoever. And I found other popular myths that people genuinely believe about language acquisition regarding the genders, such as the main one that we'll be covering today: girls learn language faster and easier than boys. Males are said to be more analytical, so therefore they should be better at grammar if they are to acquire a language. And the last one is that boys simply don't like languages at all or have no interest in acquiring a second language. So let's get into those. Okay, so the first myth we're going to be debunking is that males don't like languages or learning languages. And I think this whole idea came to be, or I don't think, I know because of what I read, that languages were seen as soft and non-technical and therefore not masculine by certain cultures and certain communities. So therefore guys are encouraged to steer clear of languages and focus on, engineering and being a doctor, etc. Please comment below if that was maybe something prevalent in your culture. Were guys told to focus on specific things because they were more manly than other things? The second myth that we're going to debunk is that if guys do learn a language, because they are said to be more analytical, they will excel at grammar. This is not true, because through my recent readings, through an article written in 2011 by Arabski entitled Individual Learner Differences in Second Language Acquisition, we saw that actually girls are better at grammar exercises because grammar exercises require abstract thinking patterns, which guys don't necessarily exhibit in language acquisition. And this was proved in a 2008 Northwestern University study where students were asked to do various writing and spelling tasks. For example, they had to hear a word and identify the word without seeing the word while being in an fMRI machine. So it sounds very intense, but from what they discovered in that study, we see that girls have greater activation, significantly greater brain activation in language learning areas associated with abstract thinking, whereas the boys' brains, tended to be activated in more of the auditory and visual learning areas. So therefore, girls are better at grammar because girls can think in an abstract manner. And finally, the main reason why we are all here today is to discover, do girls really learn languages easier and faster than guys? Another myth, it may seem that girls learn languages easier and faster than guys, but language acquisition is hugely based on the environment of learning. And we've seen, or you will see, I will include all the links to the readings and all the references to the readings I used to make this video in the bio if you guys are interested in reading up further on this. But it seems that girls are better at learning languages, because the education system is set up in a way that focuses on the skills that girls tend to have more of an abundance of in acquiring a language. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. But as we learned while debunking our previous two myths, is that males are more auditory and visual learners. So therefore they are very sensual learners, meaning they need their senses to be activated in order to truly absorb knowledge through videos, reading, writing, listening, etc. Whereas females take a more holistic approach to learning. We saw that they are more abstract thinkers. They are more, or should I say, their brains are more active in the language acquisition process. All right, and they are better at things like speech production and verb conjugations in grammar, like we discussed in our other myth that we debunked. So if those are the specific skills that the males and the females have and are better at, then that means that males would, because they are more visual, and auditory, they would do better in oral exams and exams with visual aids, like being told to describe an image that they see in the language that they are learning. Whereas girls tend to be better at exams that are traditional, we could say, exams that we see on the daily when it comes to language testing, that include writing, grammar, very little speaking involved. They tend to be better at that. So therefore, since that is what the layout of most exams are, they focus on the skills that girls have in abundance. Of course, they're going to appear to be better at learning languages and acquiring languages than boys. And because of this reason, females tend to continue with their language acquisition from first year, for example, in university to third year. And I noticed this myself because I studied languages in my undergraduate degree. And in first year, I would say it was a pretty even spread of girls versus boys in the class. But as time grew on, and by the time I reached third year, there was only girls left. And I think that's because, you know, the way in which we learn languages is so centered on the skills that girls have. For example, you know, they are better at using their brains in a more active way, in the sense more neural pathways are activated than guys, and therefore guys are discouraged to continue with learning a language because they feel inadequate in a sense, because they may just not be grasping what they're being taught. So I found that very interesting and very shocking that that's the real reason. It's not because, you know, one is better at learning a language and one is better at the sciences. It's just specifically because of the way in which the languages are taught. So males and females have distinct differences in their skill levels of different language acquisition methods, but the way in which they are taught to us focuses on the skills of the female. So I found that very interesting. Some other interesting info I found during my research process was in another study conducted by Silk, Van Houten and Schierpens, I believe is how you pronounce the surname, please don't come for me in the comments, is one of 27,119 learners from 80 different countries with different mother tongues, all wanted to acquire the second language of Dutch. And they saw in the study that boys were better at reading and listening, because that needed minimal connecting of multiple brain areas, like we saw in our previous myths, whereas females tended to be better at the writing, the speech production, and that is because that requires connection of multiple neural pathways or neuro pathways. So that is very interesting in terms of what we've been discussing today, and it links very well with the why girls seem to be better at learning languages. Another very interesting fact that I learned is although guys between the ages of 20 and 30 seem to be better at reading and listening at this present moment in time, as they age, those skills which they are better at tend to decline, whereas females, the skills that they are better at right now don't decline with time and instead tend to be built on with time. So lots of interesting information. Well, I find it interesting. I hope you do too. But basically what we can conclude is that the myth or the opinion that girls are better at languages is just that, it's a myth, okay? And boys aren't really bad at languages, we are just bad at teaching them languages. And it's important to think of ways in which we can be more inclusive of males in the learning environment, and we are going to dive into those ways in just a sec. Okay, so how can we make language learning more accessible to everyone? I think since we know males rely on sensory input for the most part when it comes to language acquisition, we can implement things like YouTube videos to teach new grammar concepts, to teach new words, to show how to construct a sentence, for example. We can also, within a test, a written test, we can, instead of putting instructions in a written form only, we can include an example in a flow diagram form that may help males to easily decipher the word wasn't coming to me, but decipher what the question is asking for and what exactly they need to do for improving their vocab or improving their pronunciation. We can have them listen to music. If they're learning Portuguese, for example, listen to Portuguese artists on Spotify or Apple Music to help better their overall understanding of the language. We also discovered that males are better at oral exams. So instead of having purely written tests, we can alternate. One week we have a written test. The next week we have an oral test where we use the grammar concepts that were maybe introduced in the class that week to construct an oral at the end of the week. So in that way we have an inclusive environment of the skills that girls have an abundance of and the skills that guys have an abundance of. We can also do things or activities where they have to use words to describe a picture that's put in front of them, or use words to describe themselves with the different vocabulary or grammar constructions that they've learned so far. From one of the myths we debunked earlier in this video, we saw that males tend to steer clear of learning languages because it's not masculine enough in a lot of cultures and communities. So in order to get rid of this narrative, we can introduce them to male role models of theirs that are polyglots or people that speak many languages, such as their favorite footballer, for example, that can speak numerous languages to make it cool, in a sense, or more masculine. And then the last thing that I thought could be fun for everyone, but would benefit males in acquiring a language is making it somewhat competitive. I've seen that many males that I've associated myself with enjoy a little bit of competition between them and their friends. So I think making language learning and language acquisition competitive would accommodate for males in the learning environment. For example, using apps like Duolingo. I'm not sure if any of the viewers here today are familiar with Duolingo, but basically you do a lesson each day and you build up XP points, and based on the number of XP points you move up on a table, and you can move from, let's say, 7th to 3rd based on how well you did in the particular lesson. And I think that creates a very fun and a healthy competition between the males of the learning environment, but also everyone. And it gets us all involved in the classroom. And I think that is where I'm going to love and leave you today. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it, and if you take anything away from this, I hope that it's not that, some people are better at certain things than others. For example, girls are better at acquiring languages than boys. It's just the way in which we go about learning them and acquiring them and having ways that facilitate these methods. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.